Hello, how you guys doing? I hope you're having a good day and staying cool on this day. Well, um, there's a controversy that's been brewing about the latest case with the AC, with the discrimination, the courts throughout the affirmative action discrimination case. And first, I thought I'd go to this channel and I play a little bit of each video. You're gonna hear the Asian people's version of it. Then it's gonna back up with some black people's, and it's gonna back up with some data. And pretty much the commentators are concluding, and even some Asian people are concluding. So there's some black commentators that's going to conclude what was this affirmative action was really about, and they were right on all sides. So I'm not really taking a side in this, but I just find it really interesting that you find out that people have there's a lot more in common, and believe it or not, you're gonna hear from Asian Americans on the other side on what they went through as far as how did it affect how it affected them, and how the ones who didn't have money and the ones who did have money. But so I'm gonna take you to this video. In this first one, let me see.
I've been in and out of therapy with BetterHelp for a few years now, and it's made prioritizing my mental and emotional health so much easier. Your 20s are such a confusing time in your life.
At this case. So last year I took I took American Government. I don't know why I still got the damn book, but anyways, I remember the section we had on affirmative action, but I just never thought I don't even know. But like back in my political posting days, 2020, 2021, it was always either a white person or an Asian person I had to try to debunk and defend the black community. What the fuck did we ever do to the Asian community? I'm confused. Did I miss something? Are we in like some type of war or something? Cause I'm really confused. But I wanted to look up some statistics, and I know people have a hard time with technology and don't want to believe the news or whatever, but I'm still gonna look some stuff up. So I'm pretty sure it might be accurate. But let's just do some research, because a lot of us do have to use the computers to do papers and essays and shit. So we're not gonna worry about UC Berkeley, but what we're gonna do is talk about, let's do Harvard. So this is Harvard, and this is a brief profile of admitted class of 2026. As you can see, they have 61,221 applicants. Admitted is just about 2,000, and admitted from the waiting list is 36. Ooh, so let's see. Out of that, African Americans, what the hell is that? African Americans is 15.2%, but Asian Americans are at 27.9%. Looks like they're benefiting the Asian community a little bit more than the black community to me. So the next one we're gonna do is Harvard, Princeton. Okay, we got Princeton. And you could honestly pause to read that, that's a little bit too much. Now, Princeton, Asian community compared to the black community. But let's compare it to the white community. Looks like Princeton is catering to the white, and the Asian community there for me. Now let's do MIT. Let's see what they got going on. Maybe the black folks could get MIT. Let's see. Oh, also the Princeton one was also from 2022 to 2023 academic year. So that's recent. Okay, so we got MIT. Let's just do the undergraduates. So for the undergrads for MIT, there's 1377 of Asian, 1066 of white. Oh, but look, black folk only 282. Bro, it's looking like you need to take your anger to the white community into your non-1600 score on that SAT.
Meet John Wang, who got rejected from top colleges and now wants to be used as a prop by conservative media. The craziest thing about this is that he's talking about affirmative action, right? And even if a black person who had some of the same standards or like a little less, somewhat comparative, right? And they were from the hood or, lower class than you are, that's actually more impressive that they were on a comparative level with less resources than you. And you feel like you deserve it more than someone who had less resources and was able to do what you did. That's what affirmative action does. They say this person had less resources than you did, and they were still able to do what you did. We should give them a shot, and you're mad at us about it.
The SAT in October of 2020, I got a 1590 out of 1600.
When I graduated from high school back in 2013, I had a little bit over a 5.0 GPA. I was number 13 out of about 700 kids in my graduating class. I had a 32 on the ACT and a 21 out of 2400 on the SAT. I took 6 AP classes, one of which I took on my own accord because it was not available my senior year. That was AP Economics, and I did dual enrollment for 2 years where I got straight A's, so I was pretty much done with my AA degree by the time I graduated from high school. On top of that, I was a founding member of the National English Honor Society. I was in the National Honor Society. I was a class officer for 4 years. I did Student Government Association for 2 years. I was in the debate team and drama club, and I did color guard and winter guard for 3 years, and then I was on the tech crew for 1 year. On top of all that, I graduated with over 350 community service hours. In fact, it was probably more of 500 community service hours, but I got too lazy and I just didn't have the people sign the paper, and I didn't feel like having to go back to do that. And in doing all of that, I'm still rejected from my top school, the University of Florida. You know how many mediocre white kids I know who were in my graduating class that got in? A lot. But as someone who worked in higher education for 4 years, I can tell you that it's holistic. It's not about the test scores. It's not about the grades. I mean, that plays a part, but they want well-rounded students. Could I have done more? Absolutely. Could this man have done more? Absolutely. But you're spewing bullshit. And you're spewing white supremacist rhetoric. And for you to have all the smoke for black students who make up less than 5% of the population, and not having any smoke for legacy admits who make up a third of admittance. In fact, it was about 36% of admitted students into Harvard are legacy students who got in because of who their mommy and daddy is. When we had an entire college admission scandal made up of white and Asian students who were lying and cheating and bribing their way into schools. When you look at people like Jared Kushner's whose daddy had to pay $3 million to get him into Harvard, are you serious? People are donating libraries and computer labs to get into school, and you're pointing the finger at the black kids? And no place in our society, at no time in our society, have black students or black people in general been able to get to a point of privilege at elite institutions by being mediocre. You have to be better than to get in. You don't know their test scores. You don't know their stats. You just point the finger and see black people, and you uphold these white supremacist standards of thinking that we're not supposed to be in these elite institutions. And it's sickening. And these conservative organizations put batteries in the backs of bigots. You didn't get in because you just weren't good enough. Sorry about it. It happens to all of us when we apply to schools. It's a 50-50 chance. Rejection is a part of the college admissions process. And, good on the people who don't get rejected. But don't try to blame black students because you didn't get in. Build a bridge and get over it.
Always wanted me to go to a good college. I took the SAT in October of 2020. I got a 1590 out of 1600. I got an 800 out of 800 on math, which was 99th percentile. And then I got a 790 out of 800 on reading, which was 98th or 99th percentile. My GPA was a 4.65, so I had the second highest GPA in my graduating class. So the top tier schools I applied to were MIT, Caltech, Princeton, Harvard, Carnegie Mellon, and UC Berkeley.
Despite his stellar grades and test scores, he was rejected by all of them. He says he was warned.
Just talking with my friends and guidance counselors, they all told me that it's tougher to get in, especially as an Asian American. I just took it as gospel.
That's also the conclusion of the highly respected Princeton Review, a company that provides test prep and college admissions advice for high school students. This is from their book, Cracking College Admissions.
Many Asian Americans have been extraordinarily successful academically, to the point where some colleges now worry that there are too many Asian Americans on their campuses. Being an Asian American can now actually be a distinct disadvantage in the admissions processes at some of the most selective schools in the country.
So what's an Asian applicant to do?
If you're given an option, don't attach a photograph to your application, and don't answer the optional question about your ethnic background. Do not write your application essay about the importance of your family or the positive/negative aspects of living in two cultures.
The bias against Asian applicants is real and wrong, says Students for Fair Admissions, which John learned about through a relative.
I read up on their cause.
Okay guys, this is crazy. I've got to share with you. I was paying $164 in car.
As an Asian who went to Harvard College then law school, I'm going to tell you exactly what the Supreme Court ending affirmative action today really means.
Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. So guys, I'm not sure if most of you have seen or heard about the court's ruling concerning the affirmative actions. Well, if you have not, well, let me be the one to update you by showing you some of the videos that I collected on how the Asian community reacted to this news, guys. So first, let me show you one of this clip, just to get you, in the clear picture of what I'm talking about, and then we'll talk.
And specifically what you should be doing if you're applying to college as a minority. First, the breaking news is that affirmative action, even if meant to promote racial diversity, now officially, legally equals racial discrimination. How? Because the court says college admissions is a zero-sum game. There are only so many spots, so if you give extra points to one minority, then another minority group loses, which is argued happened to Asians at Harvard. If there's one quote you remember, it should be that students must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race. But look, if you're applying to college, you should not abandon talking about your race. If it's important to your story, you should be writing about it, talking about it in your interview. The same colleges will still value diversity, but the burden has now shifted from the admissions officers being able to ask you about it to you, the applicant, writing about it. UNC was giving extra points to certain minorities, and Harvard said race can tip you into the acceptance pool. The court says those formal policies are not okay, but race can still be considered. It's just up to you now to talk about it.
Okay guys, so well, this is really a massive change in college admission policies in the United States, guys. Like according to my research, 45 years ago, the Supreme Court said it was fine to take race into consideration when making admission decisions, as long as it was in the interest of creating diverse student body and as long as there were no quotas. They reaffirmed that like 20 years ago, but 3-4 days ago, guys, the 6-justice conservative majority of this court said no, that it couldn't continue. In his majority opinion, Chief Justice John Robert, who has long been skeptical of affirmative action programs, said that this is a logical extension of Brown versus Board of Education, which ended segregated schools, guys. So let me just roll most of the videos that I've collected for you guys, and yeah, we'll talk.
I completely disagree with the decision to get rid of affirmative action. As a software engineer, college grad, and as an Asian, and here's why. I want to first discuss that I think there's a big misconception on how affirmative action works. I think people have this misunderstanding that there's a race quota that colleges use to have like a certain amount of black people, have a certain amount of Asian people, have a certain amount of white people, etc. That does not exist. There's no race quota in colleges in the United States. The whole point of affirmative action was to promote equal opportunity and address the historical disadvantages certain groups faced. And that could be based on race, ethnicity, or gender. I think gender is also another one that's overlooked. So how does affirmative action work when you're applying to colleges? The way it works is you can now talk about your race, your gender, your ethnicity, in your essay or in your interviews when you're applying to colleges, and they'll just take that into consideration. That's all there is to it. There's no quota. For Ivy League schools, Asian people still fill in more spots available than black people and Hispanic people combined. So take that into consideration. I googled that fact, I may be wrong, but it's on Google. Now I want to talk about why I think Asians who are mad about affirmative action are barking up the wrong tree. So of the students that get into Ivy League schools, 25 to 30% get in via legacy. That's a significant amount. And also, that's also including people who get in via sports scholarships. Black and Hispanic communities exhibit the highest poverty rates in America. And I believe that affirmative action is a step forward to breaking those cycles. So, what if you're Asian and you're poor? Well, let me tell you something. Colleges don't care if you're poor at all. Colleges are business. They're trying to make money, and they can't make money off poor people. Of course, they'll make a few exceptional cases and give out scholarships to some poor people to make an example, but that's it. That's it. Now, to wrap things up, this might be a hot take, but For the individuals who are still mad at Black and Hispanic individuals filling in spots in colleges because of their race and ethnicity, I think are borderline racist, are just racist. Because now you're saying they got in because of their race and ethnicity, not because of their intellect, their potential, and their talent. Okay, that's all I have to say. I hope that this action does not further negatively impact minority groups. And from my personal experience, my computer science program was predominantly Asian. So, is it even an issue to be mad about? You know, I don't think so.
So this ban on affirmative action earlier today is being marketed in the news as a win for the Asian American community. And I'm not quite sure about that. I'm just thinking in my situation, I really don't think this is a win for me. I have to remember that with a college like Harvard, the acceptance rate is around 5%, which means that most Asian Americans who apply don't get into Harvard. No matter how you slice and dice the admissions process, most Asian Americans who apply will never get into Harvard. Even if Harvard decided to reserve every single one of their spots to an Asian American person, even then an Asian American who applies will most likely not get it. But up until now, if you didn't get into one of these Ivy League schools, you could have at least blamed it on affirmative action. You could be like, Mom, it wasn't my fault. It was affirmative action. My race held me back. But now, what are you gonna do? Huh? What are you gonna tell your mom? Worse yet, what is she gonna tell all her friends? You can't use affirmative action as a scapegoat anymore. She's going to have to admit to everyone around you that you really weren't good enough to get in.
Okay, so the Supreme Court just banned affirmative action, and I think that means this is a good time for me to remind everyone that the hate that exists between Asians and other BIPOC folk is manufactured. This court case, the one that was brought to the Supreme Court and led to affirmative action being repealed, it is nominally, on the face, labeled as something that was for the benefit of Asian folks, but that's a lie. Asian people have been seeing increased representation in higher ed for the last few decades, correlating to affirmative action's implementation. The concept that affirmative action harms Asian Americans is frankly nonsense. And this truly is just another instance of a white organization or a conservative organization using Asians as a rhetorical tool rather than actually doing any service for them.
So the reason I haven't touched upon the actual facts of the case is because I don't know them. Since I have a law degree, I prefer to read the legal decisions myself so that I can know exactly what the court looked at and what their reasoning was. So until I've had an opportunity to do that, I avoid reading, seeing, or watching any news articles about it because I don't want my opinion being filtered through media bias. But the opinion is over 200 pages long, so it's going to take me a while. But you raise a point that was also relevant in the 2003 Supreme Court case involving the University of Michigan and affirmative action. Something I would like people to consider is that certain institutions choose to discriminate against Asian Americans is a separate issue from implementing affirmative action for Black and Indigenous students. And I'm sure there are people who are having a hard time wrapping their head around that idea because we've been brainwashed to believe that the two issues are necessarily connected. We are told that Asian Americans are overrepresented in higher education, so in order to open up seats to implement affirmative action for Black and Indigenous students, we must remove seats from Asian Americans. So what was going on in 2003 is that certain institutions were using a point system where certain applicants automatically had a half point added on the basis of race. If you were white, it was a 0, nothing added, nothing taken away. And if you were Asian American, a quarter point was removed. And this was found to be racially discriminatory against Asian Americans and unconstitutional. But the nothing added or taken away for white students was not found to be racially discriminatory. Edward Bloom has used white plaintiffs to attack affirmative action 20 times, and the reason why he fails is because courts repeatedly find that affirmative action is not unconstitutionally discriminatory against white people. He succeeded this time because he used Asian Americans, and I believe that the policies in question were found to unconstitutionally discriminate against Asian Americans. So then the court's solution was, if we can't discriminate against Asian Americans, then throw the baby out with the bathwater, affirmative action has to be banned. I think a simple solution is stop discriminating against Asian Americans. Treat Asian American students the same way that you treat white students. I'm sure some people are wondering, if we treat Asian students the same way that we treat white students, then where do the seats come from to implement affirmative action? And that exposes the real problem. White-run institutions chose to discriminate against Asian students in order to implement affirmative action because they didn't want the seats coming from legacy students or from white students. But what the bulk of Edward Bloom's cases should tell us is that affirmative action can be implemented without causing unconstitutional negative discrimination. And you all know that I feel very strongly that where those seats should come from is legacy.
So just to add on this, guys, John Roberts said that Brown versus Board of Education set the principle that schools admit students on a racially non-discriminatory basis, guys. He also wrote that eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. Interestingly enough, guys, there was a footnote in the opinion that Roberts said that none of this, interestingly, guys, applies or addresses the affirmative action programs at the military academies, guys. So guys, what is your take on this? Please let me know what you think about this in the comment section below, guys. Otherwise, let's watch the video up to the end, and please, if you have not subscribed, guys, please go ahead, subscribe, turn on the notification bell if you have not, guys.
I have no words. None. Besides the fact that I don't. Please don't lump us all in with him. That's all I ask. Like, this man does not speak for me. He does not speak for all Asians. Like, I'm a firm believer in affirmative action, and I can make another video speaking about the why. This is not, started a new chapter in the saga of did y'all see what they did to us during COVID? They said, oh, it came from China? Chinese? Get the fuck out, like, you suck. Boo, bye, okay? This is gonna start way more than you think, and not in a good way.
It's because legacy students are receiving their own untouchable form of affirmative action, which prioritizes their lower test scores based on their parents' performance. Now, I have received comments and I have read articles that indicate that the median test scores for legacy students is higher than the median test score of their non-legacy counterparts. And the implication is that those legacy students would have been admitted anyways. But it turns out that it depends on the school, and it depends on the school's legacy admissions policy, because not all schools weight legacy in the same way. But to give legacy as the greatest benefit of the doubt, let's assume that it is true across the board that legacy students have a median test score that's higher than their non-legacy counterparts. What that means is the bottom quartile of legacy students who are admitted receive test scores that are lower than the median for their non-legacy counterparts. And for a school like Harvard, where 40% of the incoming class in question was legacy, it's very significant that 10% of the entire incoming class was legacy students who were less qualified than their non-legacy counterparts. That's about 120 seats. Now, with respect to the argument that legacy students who have better GPA and receive test scores would have been admitted anyways, that's just proof that they don't need special consideration, and they shouldn't. If you are the child of parents who went to elite universities, and you are the child of parents who are able to make donations to those universities, you don't need special consideration because you've had every opportunity to earn a high GPA and to earn high test scores. You had parents who knew how to guide your education and who had the resources to put into guiding your education. So again, their higher median test score is actually just more proof that they don't need special accommodations.
Story time of how affirmative action saved me. Okay, so when I graduated high school, I was top of my class, co-valedictorian, tons of extracurricular activities, and I'm not really sure how I did it, but I earned the most prestigious scholarship in the state in which I was born and raised. The scholarship was so amazing that you could go to any college or university in that state, tuition, books, room and board, and you'd have a stipend paid for. I was the first in the state Chinese American who got it. And while my Chinese American community was proud of me, the white community was a little suspicious. I even had teachers and peers within the program that got in tell me that it was because of affirmative action. I actually believe them. When I gathered with the other recipients, because we'd have to schmooze and be grateful to the donors, I remember feeling like a complete fraud because the people that were around were incredibly distinguished, comfortable in their skin, gifted at musical instruments, athletic, well-traveled. It was like, I don't know why I was there, because I didn't know any of that. I grew up working class. I started work when I was 8 years old and literally have never stopped working. Never. Vacations when I was a kid, no birthday parties, we worked on holidays. My parents didn't complete middle school, so they didn't really envision what going to college would look like. So it wasn't quite fair to compare myself with kids who never had to work until after college, who didn't understand the creativity that was needed to make a decision between getting gas to go to work or have lunch that day, and who got to explore every single interest because they had access to money, time, and a society that welcomed their pursuit of their own happiness. My dad died when I was a freshman in high school, and I had no strategy about getting out and going to college. I was literally trying to survive because we had to sell our house, we had to sell our restaurant. He was the chef, so there was no savings that could have happened if we hired a chef. So my mom moved to another town, and I did high school on my own, essentially. I got great grades. I was active in extracurriculars, not because I was trying to pad my resume, but because I was incredibly lonely. To white women, you benefited the most from affirmative action. The most, more than me. To the people who do not understand why diversity matters, fuck you. I am so sick of cleaning up the mess of the willful, ignorant, and entitled 1%.
These are the students Harvard admits by race. If you're in the top 10 percentile of your class and you're white, you have about a 15% admit rate. If you're Asian, you have about a 12.7% admit rate. If you're African American, you have about a 56.1% admit rate and 31.3% if you're Hispanic. If you come all the way down here to the 5th academic percentile, while Asian Americans have about a 1.9% admit rate, African American students have almost a 10 times greater admit rate than Asian American students. As here, an Asian American in the 4th lowest decile has virtually no chance of being admitted to Harvard, but an African American in that decile has a higher chance of admission, 12.8%, than an Asian American in the top 10 percentile. I understand both sides of the argument and I sympathize with both. The fact of the matter is, this is a very nuanced situation. It's easy to blame one another, but that's the one thing that we shouldn't do. Let me know what you guys think about this situation.
Okay, well guys, in conclusion, there was some interest.
Well, I'm gonna go on to the next one. Professor Black took back up what they're saying.
If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. Okay, because of all the noise and disinformation going on out there from these white supremacists, we need to talk about the totally predictable Supreme Court ruling regarding affirmative action in schools. Let's get the obvious stuff out of the way. Affirmative action didn't come along until the late 1960s, but you've had white racists who have been telling that lie about a black man got my job, a black man got my place in school long before affirmative action even existed.
I want to give you the truth, folks. The truth about America. I know you've got a lot of questions. You want to know why you're not getting the breaks you deserve? Well, I'm not a politician, but I've made it my business to study these things, and I happen to know the facts. Now, friends, I'm just an average American. But I'm an American. And some of the things I see in this country of ours make my blood boil. I see people with foreign accents making all the money. I see Negroes holding jobs that belong to me and you. Now I ask you, if we allow this thing to go on, what's going to become of us real Americans? What are we real Americans going to do about it? You'll find it right here in this little pamphlet. The truth about Negroes and foreigners. Now friends, these books are free. Paid for by real Americans who want others to know the truth. I'm speaking to you as an American. And I tell you, friends, we'll never be able to call this country our own until it's a country without. Without what? Yeah, without what? Without Negroes.
Now that was from the 1940s. As you just saw, the white supremacists falsely claiming that black people are getting their jobs or their anything is not a new lie at all. They were saying it long before affirmative action even existed, decades before, and even after the Supreme Court's ruling last week, they're still going to keep on saying it, because what they're really objecting to is black people. That's what this is really about. These universities and colleges were not letting black students in droves, so this isn't the W that the white supremacists desperately want it to be. Clarence Thomas is himself a recipient of affirmative action. He certainly wouldn't be where he is without it, not because I say so, but because he said so. And these white supremacists don't like to hear about that, mostly because they can't read and can't think. Thirdly, we are the only oppressed group in this nation. Everyone else is at most inconvenienced, but they try to explode their momentary inconvenience into oppression when it's not. One of the political stumbling blocks we've been saddled with, though, are the lawmakers, including everyone else and things that are supposedly meant to benefit us. So when you see the Supreme Court attacking affirmative action, this is actually a chance to do a much-needed reset. We don't need affirmative action any more than we need civil rights. What we need is black action, and we need black rights. Contrary to what these conservative extremists try to say, when it comes to school admissions, it's actually been the white students who have failed to meet the academic requirements and have been allowed in anyway because of race. And that brings us to all this phony hysteria the white right said about black students being allowed into universities because of color and nothing else. It's projection. They're actually talking about what they've been doing, but trying to distract everybody by talking about black people. It's a lie, but when you're trying to commit a crime, you have no choice but to lie and lie big. Here's the reality. The real diversity admissions to these colleges and universities have mainly been the very conservative activists who have been complaining that it's black students getting in because of race. When talking about universities, you don't say that white students get let in because of race. Instead, they use the more distinguished term legacy admission. But what does that even mean, a legacy admission? Well, here's a few examples.
Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, I mean, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. I mean, woke is...
And you're working hard to put food on your family. There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, can't get fooled again.
I'm not a candidate, so we'll see if and when that changes.
Might have surprised many, but not those of us who've known and worked with Elon for nearly a quarter century. His commitment to freedom and his willingness to put his money where his mouth is, upset the narrative imposed on us by our government.
Later that day, Senator Hawley fled after those protesters he helped to rile up stormed the Capitol.
Despite a first-class education at Vanderbilt, UVA Law School, and Oxford in England, here is his latest marketing effort designed with the help of his friends at the NRA, and this one happened to go terribly wrong. They were hoping we'd be so swoony over the sight of him polishing his pistol, listening to that porn music, that we'd miss the misspelling. Fred Wellman, a West Pointer, Army veteran with the Lincoln Project, put it this way: I can't be live, this idiot went to Oxford.
Dear Lord, save us from the IQ stupid people.
And that's just the tip of a very large, very stupid iceberg. The whole world got to see just how easily white students are allowed to bypass academic requirements to get into these colleges altogether when that whole celebrity college admissions scandal blew up 4 years ago. Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin were getting their clearly unqualified, blonde-haired, blue-eyed daughters admitted to top schools. They both paid so-called admissions consultants to help get their intellectually deficient children into the schools of their choice. In the case of Felicity Huffman, she paid her consultant $15,000 and arranged to have someone, probably a black student who actually did know the material, secretly correct all of her daughter's SAT scores so she would have an artificial score of 1420. According to notes taken by Huffman, it would have cost SAT score. I don't know why she didn't just pony up the money. I guess she figured as empty-headed as her child is, a perfect test score simply wouldn't be believed by anyone. But as much money as Felicity Huffman paid to bribe her daughter into a university, it was nothing compared to Lori Loughlin, who paid $500,000 to get her two daughters into the University of Southern California, and she did it by falsely portraying them as rowing students. Apparently this is what her college admissions consultant came up with. By the way, I want you to remember that whole water sports thing as a way to get into these schools. You're going to be seeing it again in just a moment. By the way, that whole my little daughter is into rowing sports thing, that sounds and smells like crap. You tell somebody these girls do rowing as an athletic competition and that's supposed to be enough to get them into an elite school? Of course not. You wouldn't need to pay $500,000 for that. Though you would need $500,000 to get the administrators of these Ivy League and elite schools to give your child the white privilege pass. Because anyone who thinks that these admission schemes aren't an inside job, anyone who actually says that they don't believe these college administrators are in on it, you're either stupid or a conservative. It's usually at this point that we have the Ben Shapiro, Steve Crowder wannabes who start shrieking and hollering in the comments saying, you don't know that these rowing programs or these swimming programs are just a front to let white students in who are not qualified. You can't prove that. Actually, I can. Huffman and Loughlin's college admissions scandal broke in summer of 2019. But what most people forgot was that just a few months earlier, a Stanford University sailing coach pleaded guilty to accepting over $600,000 in bribes. He accepted over $600,000 from these wealthy suburbanite parents, and in return, he would guarantee that their academically inferior kids would get into Stanford under the guise of accepting these low-performing applicants as recruits for his school's sailing program. That way, it didn't matter how lousy their grades were. Now, do you truly believe that a sailing coach is just picking and choosing whomever he wants to give admission to, and the school's administrators didn't even look at who it was he was choosing? None of them saw it, nobody even looked at the applications? What, is this guy a one-man application board by himself? Because the only way that he could do that is if he was. This guy is not a football or basketball coach, he was a lowly sailing coach. How does a nobody and a nothing like him have the ability to arbitrarily guarantee that he can get these undeserving, unqualified suburban brats into Stanford as long as he vouches for them? The only way he can do that is if he had a number of administrators there who were getting a taste. Look at how much Lori Loughlin paid just to get her two daughters into USC. Now when you look at that $500,000, and you look at the fact that this guy got a little over $600,000 for the years of bribes that he had been accepting, that's how you know the total amount of money that's been kicked around in bribes to these schools just at Stanford alone has to be a hell of a lot more than just $500,000. There's millions of dollars coming in every single year in the form of bribes so that these administrators will go ahead and allow the white privilege pass to take place. And yet, even after this scandal broke, nobody in the white media or the government or even among the nation's academics has demanded to know what students this corrupt coach let into Stanford. Notice that? Even when the celebrity school admissions scandal broke, nobody looked and said, hey, let's connect to this Stanford thing. Isn't this very similar to what we heard about from Stanford just 6 months ago? They're not revealing any names. They're not connecting the dots. This is meant to give the false impression that, hey, there's nothing to see here. Look at these black kids over here. Oh, sure, there's no proof that these guys don't deserve to be here, but they're black and we need a distraction, so here we go. And just to show that Stanford was complicit in these crimes, according to that corrupt coach, he claimed that he didn't keep the money himself, that it was put into the Stanford sailing program, and that he was the one being scapegoated instead of the people who were getting rich off of it buying themselves homes and paying their kids' tuition with the money he was bringing in. And how much money were we talking about here? It was a hell of a lot more than $15,000 or even $500,000. Now this coach claims that he was just the middleman for this operation, but even so, one student in particular's family paid $6.5 million through this sailing program scheme to get their daughter into Stanford. I want you to think about that. One white student's family paid over $6 million just to get the administrators of Stanford to let their daughter in. This student was allowed to enroll into Stanford, but she never even got on the sailing team, and she wasn't even designated as a sailing recruit. See, that was just the cover story, just for the paperwork. Stanford staff knew that she wasn't there for sailing, and so they let her right in because she paid enough. The university only expelled her after the coach's bribes were exposed. But what happened to all that money? And of course, that Stanford sailing coach wasn't the only one. 2 years after he got sentenced, you had another case that came to light in which a tennis coach at Georgetown University pleaded guilty to taking bribes to get white students into Georgetown under the false guise of them being tennis recruits. He placed at least a dozen unqualified students into Georgetown by claiming they would be recruits for the university's tennis team, including students who didn't even play competitively. And how much did he get for this corruption? He got at least $3.4 million. And according to the feds, that's how much he put into his own pocket. That's how much he got. If the Stanford sailing scandal is anything to judge by, God only knows how much Georgetown got. But of course, nobody at Georgetown ever looked at anyone's paperwork, or so the university administration claims. This is what's been going on in these universities. This is how a lot of these white students have been getting in. Now, if you have people paying that kind of money to the school's sailing program or paying that much to this other school's tennis program, we're talking about the lowliest programs there that nobody cares about. Why would anyone pay millions of dollars for that? Because this is where the white students are able to get in. And how did this all slip by the school's administration or the school's dean? Am I supposed to believe that this sailing coach or that this tennis coach happened to also be in charge of their respective schools' bookkeeping too? They're the ones who balance the books? So this is not about a few $100,000. This is not even about a few million. It's millions and millions and millions of dollars going to these white universities every single year. And the schools are not oblivious to it. They're raking in the dough. Or are we supposed to believe that these Ivy League administrators, who are supposed to be the smartest people on the planet to hear them tell it, they conveniently have no idea that this is going on right in front of them? Forget about under their nose. Millions of dollars coming in, that's not under your nose, that's right in front of you. Nobody talks about it at cocktail parties or university functions. No gossip or rumors about it. These universities are basically small towns unto themselves. But absolutely nobody talked about this at all? Really? And I know it may be indelicate to say, but the white right loves to use non-white people as their stalking horses, their front men for these little racial operations. In this case, the pretense they used was that they're doing all of this to actually help Asian students. However, a lot of these Asian students come from very well-to-do families themselves, who come from the same social economic strata as people like the Huffmans and the Lachlan's. And they also place supreme emphasis on their children getting into these top schools. I have to wonder, if these wealthy white families have been paying millions to get their white children into these schools, then have these Asian families who have been involved in these lawsuits also been doing the same pay-to-play as the Huffmans, the Lachlan's, and others? Why is nobody looking into it? Oh, and on a side note, the very next year after Stanford's sailing scandal, they announced that they were going to be canceling 11 of their sports programs. And which programs went on Stanford's chopping block? Not Stanford's basketball or football programs, because the black students are the ones who bring in the lion's share of the athletic revenue. Instead, the so-called athletic programs that Stanford was going to cancel were things like men and women's fencing, field hockey, squash, synchronized swimming, men's volleyball and wrestling, lightweight rowing, men's rowing, and co-ed women's sailing. Yeah, all of those things that were being used as the back door for wealthy white families to sneak their kids in, that's what they were going to be getting rid of. So you won't be surprised to learn that when Stanford announced this, they had all hell break loose from a lot of those wealthy white families, including the threat of lawsuits. Needless to say, when they were going to have their white privilege back door taken away from them, they immediately moved and said, well, we're not giving any more money. We'll use our money for lawsuits if we can't get into these schools. You can guess what happened next. Stanford quietly announced that they weren't getting rid of those programs after all. And that's why these admissions consultants tell their wealthy white clients that they can get their kids into these schools under the guise of being a rowing athlete. This is the reason why every time you look up, you see these white college students engaged in rowing or regatta or swimming or whatever. All these colleges on the East Coast, they make it a point to show students doing those things. That's the white privilege pass. That's why those sports are completely white. Universities have long used athletic water sports as a way to bypass academic requirements for certain students, so they can be arbitrarily admitted to these universities. It is routine, and it's been going on for a very, very long time. And the worst part about it is, these suburbanites who they're letting into these schools, they're not getting in because they're excellent at water sports. At least when Charles Barkley's illiterate behind got admitted to college, it was because he was actually an excellent athlete. These white privilege admissions, like Felicity Huffman's daughters or Brett Favre's kids, they can't even say that much. And schools also accept bribes from these wealthy parents who make donations to the school for a new building or whatever. By the way, when you see some white conservative organization paying big money for lawyers to bring up these nuisance suits against affirmative action, these are in many cases the same people, the exact same people who pay big money to these schools to get their own academically unqualified children in, because these schools are not about education, not for them. They're about networking and contacts and getting one's foot into the door of the 1%. That's what it's really about. And this is how it's done. That's the reason why you had Huffman and Laughlin's daughters, and you've seen the videos where these two little party animals were bragging that when they get to university, it's going to be all about partying and getting high. Talk about money well spent. And now that we've taken a look at who's really being led into these universities due to their skin color, that brings us to the next question. How many black parents do you see giving bribes for their kids to get into these schools? None. This wasn't a bribery program based on money. This was a side door for white privilege. And that corrupt Stanford sailing coach was just one guy at one university. When you look at what it was that Huffman and Laughlin's so-called consultants were telling them was going to be their daughter's golden ticket into those universities, you see that it's been going on at more places than just Stanford. This is all over the place, but it doesn't get talked about. This is the white media engaged in blatant racial censorship. Because when it comes time to talk about who's getting into colleges and universities because they deserve to and who doesn't, they want it to literally just be about black people and nobody else. They're manufacturing a phony racial narrative. And I'm giving you the facts. There's a reason that these big-time universities have billion-dollar endowments. You don't get those kind of numbers strictly off of tuition fees. You get them because these schools are understood to be the gateways, the exclusive gateways to elite power. And access to power costs. What the racist right-wing zealots don't say is that without those black college and university students, this would be the totality of America's collegiate student body. Now, both Huffman and Laughlin did some jail time as a result, about 2 weeks. By the way, on a side note, both Hoffman and Laughlin have gone on with their acting careers despite their criminality. They've still been able to get acting roles as if nothing had happened. And that white sailing coach from Stanford, he didn't do any jail time at all. The judge just let him off with a $10,000 fine. This is the punishment for people who commit federal crimes with these admission scams. Slaps on the wrist. But hey, white privilege doesn't exist, right? Black people just make that up. This is the reason why the white right has made a crusade out of their phony racial hysteria, and why you see them shrieking the loudest about affirmative action in school admissions. It's because they know they're the main ones who couldn't pass a taste test, much less an SAT test. That's why I did that compilation of these conservative con men's greatest hits, or rather greatest misses. This is how smart these people are now, when they're supposed to be experts on what I don't know. We can only imagine how stupid they were when they were in school. By the way, on a side note, even though Clarence Thomas got his jobs in the 1970s due to affirmative action, he was willing to admit to it then, but he changed his stripes soon enough. Don't forget, he was also affiliated with the Black Panthers when he was in college. Notice the wording that I used. I said he was affiliated with them. He wasn't actually a member. But then again, that becomes a distinction without a difference, because if you look at Clarence Thomas, you can compare him directly to a real card-carrying Black Panther, Bobby Rush, and you see what he became over the decades. Isn't it interesting how all those young firebrands from the 60s and 70s quickly turned into old bootlicks in their 30s and 40s? White supremacists are very good at sizing up their bootlicks. They can smell the desperation and the pathetic need to be accepted by massa from a mile away. And it is precisely that kind of individual, devoid of morals or ethics, completely and thoroughly self-interested to the detriment not just only of themselves, but anyone who even looks like them, that white supremacy can use these eager fools, these useful idiots, as their crash dummies. And And these cherry-picked bootlicks will go right along with it, and they'll sing Massa's song louder than Massa does. Isn't that what Clarence Thomas has been doing? He has literally made a decades-long career out of showing how much he absolutely hates black people because he's auditioning for all of these wealthy white supremacists like that Harlan Crow character that he wants to be buying things for him and giving him money and take care of him like their pet. Because that's what he is. And no matter what Clarence Thomas's qualifications or credentials may appear to be on paper, he knows what his real job is. It is to cover for the white supremacists who are funding him. White privilege has been and continues to be the largest and longest running affirmative action program in human history. From the Homestead Act to the GI Bill and other programs for veterans coming back from both world wars to redlining all the way to the present. The suburbs were built with money from the inner cities, that is to say black residents' money. There has always been a gigantic conveyor belt taking this country's wealth from those who produced it and handing it to other people based entirely on their skin color. That's why the white Frenchman Frederick Bastiat said, when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. And that's what we're seeing and have seen for hundreds of years. A legal system that authorizes theft, murder, enslaving black people, forcing black people to build wealth without compensation, to be raped and murdered without consequence, and then to praise the slave owners who did it, as well as the psychopathic racists who continue these practices, and the society who benefits from it. The white supremacists have been allowed to rename their plunder and savagery as hard work. The ruling white elite are called working families. People who have spent centuries with the government handing them every crumb of their daily bread, who built none of the country's wealth, but who came from Europe in the late 19th century to enjoy what others had made possible, called themselves producers. And then afterwards do everything that they can to attack and even kill the people who did produce the wealth that others enjoy. In order for a murdering thief to get away with their crime, they have no choice but to kill the witness. This is the world turned upside down, but now, having established a status quo like this, the only way they can keep it going is through more lies and more violence, which is why we see them so eager to back the badge. The function that the police serve in society under white supremacy is to put the credible threat of violence behind all of these unjust and unconstitutional laws and legal rulings. In effect, what we call laws are actually nothing more than lists of the things that the police will be allowed to pursue, arrest, or kill people over. Because that's what gives the law its teeth. That's why they're called law enforcement. The word enforce means to put strength into something. And the courts are a key part of that. The white right realized they had lost the battle for hearts and minds decades ago, so they would need the courts to do their dirt for them, because the politicians in these legislatures understood exactly what the voter backlash would be if they tried it at the state level. Judges who are unelected and largely unaccountable. That would be the white right's trump card. Keep in mind, these are the same people who love that saying that when the government's afraid of the people, you call that democracy, and when the people are afraid of the government, you call that tyranny. But the white right's belief in that slogan was put to the test in the last 30 years, and as we see, they've been backpedaling at Mach speed. All of a sudden, the people just need to do whatever the politicians tell them, and the politicians need to be immune and insulated from the people's ability to punish them for laws that they don't approve of. Don't take my word for it. In the infamous Supreme Court ruling Shelby v. Holder, none other than the satanic Antonin Scalia himself came right out and said it. That the reason that he was ruling against Shelby v. Holder to strike down the Voting Rights Act was because he didn't like the Voting Rights Act personally. He'd been crusading against it since at least the 1980s. He said that the politicians would never repeal the Voting Rights Act because they were scared of what the voters would do if they tried it. So, as Antonin Scalia put it, the Supreme Court has to strike it down, because the politicians never will. Gee, isn't that what the white right claimed was democracy? The politicians scared of the people? But of course, that's only what the white right says when they think they're going to have it all their own way. But when the will of the people actually does touch the politicians, and their white domination is threatened, all of a sudden it's no longer democracy, it's mob rule. And what do they call a white mob that overruns the Capitol? A normal tourist visit. When you look at what Scalia gave as his feeble excuse for striking down the Voting Rights Act, what he said is the literal definition of legislating for saw a law that he didn't like. He didn't actually have the authority to change it. He admitted that he knew what he was doing was actually the purview of the legislature, but he made his ruling based not on the law, but based solely on how he wanted things to be. Scalia said it himself. This shows that the white right knows how weak their position is. This is why getting control of the federal bench has been so important to the white right. It's their last ditch. That's the reason why whenever they have these federal judges, the Federalist Society says make sure that there's somebody in their late 20s, early 30s. Why? Somebody who'll be on the bench for a generation, maybe two. That's the point. They know they can't go to the legislatures. They tried it in Michigan and at the federal level, and their schemes didn't even make it out of committee. They had no choice but to go to an unelected bureaucrat instead, which is what the courts are. And yeah, you see the white supremacists trying to pretend as if they once...
I'm gonna stop it right here, and I'm gonna go to the next video.
Can we fix your basement with our new basement waterproofing system? Let us know. We're looking for wet, damp, or musty
Before I actually get into this, I actually wanted to get like a bigger screenshot of what you're seeing right here, but for some reason the Hill website is not working, so I had to just get this screenshot off of the bookmarks. Thank God I actually bookmarked it, but it is what it is. So you see this picture right here, and it's coming from the Hill, like I said, and the title reads, because it cuts off, Asian Americans have mixed views on using race in college admissions, according to an analysis. Now, one reason why I'm doing this story is because I keep thinking about what I talked about in my live stream with John Wayne. If y'all don't know, because I didn't leave that particular live stream up in public view, I put it on the Patreon. So if y'all are a patron on Patreon, y'all can see the playback unless y'all caught the actual live stream in real time, where he basically tried to say that there was affirmative action that was being used in order to get black students into a particular school that he had applied to, even though California as a state outlawed affirmative action years before he was even born. So he was basically putting his whole foot in his mouth when he said that. And I was trying to decide whether or not if this was going to be the story that I was going to cover in the live stream and let the Jonathan Wayne be its own video, or vice versa. But I said, you know what, I'll just let that one be in the live stream and let this one be its own standalone video. So I find it very interesting that we have this situation here where there are some Asian Americans right now who are kind of split on whether or not that race should be a factor when it comes to getting admitted to college, and then there are some that are saying that it should not matter. It should only matter like when it comes to the actual requirement itself, such as, you know, the usual test scores, grades, or any other determining factors that are needed when it comes to this. But I'm going to go ahead and read more into it and see what else they're talking about. And the subheading says, while most Asian Americans believe race should not be a factor in college admission, half think that affirmative action is something good. Now, let me just say this. Affirmative action was initially, on paper, supposed to be for black people. But we know it got hijacked, like mostly everything else, by white people, in particular, white women. But what I find to be interesting is that whenever they talk about affirmative action, they talk about it in the standpoint as if black people as a collective stand to benefit from it, and have benefited from it. To a certain extent, possibly, but not in the way that it should have been. And the thing is, they know that affirmative action was supposed to be for black people, but we don't benefit from it the most. It's mainly white women. There have been studies and documents that can back that up going back years. And I believe to this day, I think some of them still benefit from it. So when Jonathan Wayne had made that comment, I'm sitting here saying to myself, you should be mad at white women because they're the ones that benefit the most from it. But I mean, like I said, y'all watched it in the live stream. I got out over there, or on there, what I had to say about it. So we're going to go into more and see what they're talking about. Asian Americans have mixed feelings on colleges considering race during the admission process, according to a new analysis from the Pew Research Center. Researchers found that 3/4 of Asian American adults believe race or ethnicity should not factor into
college admissions decisions. I wonder why they're saying that. I wonder if they have the same sentiments as John Wayne. Because again, whenever they bring up affirmative action, they always link it back to us, even though we don't benefit from it like that at all. It was supposed to be for us, but again, hijacking. Instead, the bulk of Asian Americans believe that things such as grades, community service, and test scores should be valued more than race and ethnicity during the college admissions process. And here's where the trick bag comes in. Let's hypothetically say that they just did away with affirmative action altogether, and say that it's only a few black people that actually do pretty good. And you know, I've talked about it in a couple of my live streams where you've had a few black people, young black people at that, who have done phenomenal. One getting them almost $10 million in scholarships. You had the siblings, ages 13 and 14, graduating from college, and a host of other things. Take away affirmative action, and guess what? They still would most likely qualify over other people. And what it is going back to John Wayne, and I think Harvey talked about it, it's the fact that a lot of them feel that we are not deserving of these kind of achievements or to get into these prestigious schools. They feel we got in based on what? Affirmative action. So all I'm saying is this: let them get rid of affirmative action, and if the outcome is still not what they want, what are they going to claim then? You can't blame affirmative action. So what you going to blame? So I said that's the trick bag. Most people, 87%, said that colleges should look at high school grades when determining which students are admitted, while 71% said community service and standardized test scores should also be factors. Keep in mind what I said in my video when I was roasting, what's his face? Dinesh D'Souza, when I was showing those screenshots at the end about how there was in some Asian countries where they were using old tests, like bootleg tests or tests from the past, that they were administering to these students so they could pass. That's why a lot of these standardized tests get thrown out, because stuff like that gets exposed. Even those can't be trusted to an extent. Almost equal shares of Asian Americans do not think race should be a factor in the college admissions process, regardless of age, gender, education, and or origin group. The analysis also found that 77% of Indian Americans and 76% of Chinese, Filipino, and Vietnamese Americans believe race and ethnicity should not be considered during college admissions. Similarly, 72% of Korean Americans and 70% of Japanese American adults hold the same belief. Pew released the analysis ahead of the forthcoming Supreme Court decision on two cases involving college admissions and affirmative action, one at Harvard University and the other at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In both cases, the plaintiffs argue each school's consideration of race during the admission process unlawfully puts white and Asian American students at a disadvantage. However, the analysis suggests that there are contradictory feelings about the practice, since just over half of Asian Americans who have heard of affirmative action believe it is a good thing. And I'm trying to figure out how it gives them a disadvantage, because if y'all remember when I was talking about John Wayne and we brought up the stats, the school he was trying to get into admitted Asians and whites at a very higher rate than they did black students. Like, the black student population at the school he was trying to go to was lower than Asians. Like, I believe whites was 1, Asians was 2nd, and blacks were 3rd, and it was a very low 3rd at that. See it again, like the article suggests, it's a contradictory thing. They're not being honest, but I'm not surprised either. These new results, they add another data point and should be recorded correctly, but I'm not entirely sure. I think the results are dispositive, said Anthony S. Chin, Associate Professor of Sociology and Political Science at Northwestern University. Chin added that it is difficult to really determine what people think about affirmative action in education. What people say in terms of their answers is highly sensitive to what they are asked about and how things are worded, he added. Chin pointed to an Associated Press NORC analysis from the University of Chicago published last month, which also attempted to gauge public opinion on affirmative action, but asked its questions differently in order to garner new results. In that study, 2/3 of American adults said they believe the Supreme Court should allow the consideration of race and ethnicity in the college admissions process. I have a great deal of respect for the Pew operation, but it's important to place their results in the context of other results, and I would caution against interpreting what they have found as providing totally conclusive proof that a clear and overwhelming majority of Americans or Asian Americans implicably oppose the consideration of race as one of many factors in the college admissions process, Chin told The Hill in a statement. A broader Pew study also published on Thursday found that 50% of U.S. adults as a whole say they disapprove of affirmative action practices. I would like to know what those demographic-wise, what those other percentages are. They love affirmative action when it can benefit them. But when it doesn't, then they'll use it as a dog whistle language like, oh, affirmative action is what prevented me from getting here and getting...
Amid global market volatility, stock market losses, and rising inflation...
Well, you see two different versions of what Tareen alluded said, Professor Black Truth, and the other women on the channel speak about. Just hopefully it doesn't put a wedge any further behind the misconceptions that all Asians support this, Asian Americans support this. Clearly, to see the couple videos, they were throwing out facts and truth and articles and everything. It's really, and now we see what the culprit was behind it, like what Professor Black Truth is the Asian community got used to play one against the other and against the other people, and that's what it was. Is because white privileged people in high places want to get their kids into school, and it knocks out a potential person, black or Asian or Hispanic, again. So now we see what's really going on. So there you have it. So hopefully, then a lot of black people are going to look at the Asian community, because not every Asian agree with that, because they see what's going on. They're being used, and just like black people are being used. And one thing about I learned how what they call white supremacists use, they play one guy against the other guy. It'd be one particular racist person in politics at a different level, and this be like someone come along to me, say for example, a person who's prejudiced would come to me and say, black people are cool with them, but them other people over in that corner is not, and we gotta do something about them. And we start railing, and if I stood in agreement with what they're saying, then it's like they all right, but that same racist white person that has something against me will go back and tell that person who, if they're Hispanic or Asian, whatever, that you see how the blacks are, blah blah, this and blah blah that, and it's a twofold, and that's what it comes down to. They pretty much got used, and now it's like the one guy said, it's probably manufactured to put a wedge, and that's what they do. But like I said, it's going to backfire in some form or fashion. So, hope people can see this video, share, like the video, and you see both sides of it. Some ways people they split because they know something ain't right, and there's some Asians, Asian Americans, they're catching on. They see the whole picture, and they went through some stuff too, at a different level. It's like, let's kick out one thing, and they do this to the East Indians and other groups of people who's up at that category. The Middle Eastern people, certain Middle East, they do that. They do the same thing to them. The same racist system. It always at a totem pole. and let's see who can kind of play like a Jenga, who can knock each other down and serve their purpose. So that's what these politicians and these people these elite people are doing, who have this money. That's what they're doing, and this completely, you can see it can really divide the people up. And I hope that, this video, sorry being kind of long, but to see the whole picture of it from both sides, from black commentators and to Asian commentators, to see what's really going on, who's really behind it, who's benefit from it. So yeah, man, I hope you enjoy this video. Share, like it with your friends, but hopefully this would open up your eyes to anybody, even if you're not Asian or African American, even if you're white or any other. You see what you really don't know what's going on till you hear the whole picture. Alright then, guys, I hope you enjoy this video. Till next time, see you on the next video. Bye-bye.